Welcome to Storycomic Presents, where we interview amazing storytellers and artists. This is episode 90. I am your host, Barney Smith of storycomic.com, and we are excited to have with us the acclaimed and award-winning paranormal romance author, Melissa Sercia. Melissa.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm really good. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I tell you, and I gotta say too, is like, I enjoy. We're just talking before we went on the air that just how fun it is to make sure like sounds and microphones are working well. So I had to check to be sure that was on the right mic, and I gotta say, man, you great setup. I gotta say too, is you like a radio station level sound that we have coming from the great state of California right now.
That's right. Yes, I aim to be the utmost professional.
And so I gotta say, because you're looking at it before, like you've been coming out with book after book after book, and you actually you just had one come out last month.
Yeah.
You had one come out that was based off of your Beautiful Dark Beasts. No, I'm sorry. No, your
you're right. You're right.
I did. Okay,
yeah,
good. Yes.
I had two books.
April.
I had two books come out in May. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And you're coming out later this month. You're coming out one of your other Immortal Billionaire series. Book 3 of your Immortal Billionaire series is coming out.
Exactly.
After I Run.
Yes.
Wow.
I know. Yeah. In May I had, because I'm with City Owl Press. I'm a, author with them. And then I also do my self-published books. So in May, it just happened to coincide where I was having a book come out with them, which is this sequel to Smoke and Ritual. And that's the Beautiful Dark Beast series. And so that came out. And then literally like 2-3 weeks later, my second book for Immortal Billionaires came out too. So I was just like launching promo releases left and right. I didn't get much sleep.
And your first Immortal Billionaire series came out last October.
Yeah.
And you're scheduled to have Immortal Billionaires 4, the 4th book, coming out this October.
Yeah.
So you're coming out with 4 books of the same series.
Well, I'm also, I haven't like announced it yet or done the pre-order yet, but there will be book 5 I'm trying to get out by the end of December. So,
oh my goodness.
I know.
We're still going to the same theme, After I something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be After I Obey.
After you, okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. That's awesome. So, and what's the what is it because you already wrote out who the main supernatural creature in After I Run is a werewolf, and then after I Burn is a demon. Is this?
Yeah, he's a siphon, so he can literally just he'll take someone and put his hands on their head, and he can siphon whatever powers they have. So he's extremely dangerous, and he's kind of. So hope I can say that live. Sorry, YouTube. But that's how he gets his powers. Is if it's a vampire, he will siphon them for a little bit and have those vampire abilities, and they don't last forever. They're not permanent, so he's constantly having to siphon. So he's the villain essentially in the first 3 books, and so book 4, After I Burn, is his story because there's always 2 sides to every story.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I guess my question. So before we kind of like jump in, because I got so many questions to ask you about these 3 book series. I'm excited to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
Do you want just kind of give our audience kind of a quick background on how you got into writing paranormal romance novels?
Yeah, I started writing urban fantasy.
Okay.
And I had this idea for Blood and Magic, which is the first book I ever wrote, my debut book. And I was, as I was telling you before, I was in this corporate job that I hated. And I've always been a writer my whole life, and, poetry and songs and short stories, but just never really took it seriously as a career. And then all of a sudden I have this job I hate. And it starts coming to me like, oh God, I really want to write. So this book came to me one night. I was just thinking like, the what if questions, like, oh, what if this world was real and we just didn't know it because it was, we weren't privy to it, or we just, now that we're grown up, we don't believe in magic anymore and all that stuff. So
Right.
I just started doing research, and it took me about 5 years to write the first book, and to really like put it together and research it, almost 5 years. And then I was like, okay, what am I going to do with it now? So I didn't know anything about it, the industry or publishing. And so at first I kind of like queried agents and, got a bunch of rejections. It wasn't the right, fit for them, a bunch of form letters essentially. And I'm like, great, what am I going to do? And I went on Twitter and I found this like great writing community on Twitter and learned so much, just about everything. And I discovered small presses, which were, used to be considered like vanity presses, but now they're really legit and really helpful. And they're that like middleman that can help you get published for the first time if you have a story that they're interested in. So I went that route and published my first book in 2018. And that was my goal. I was like, I want to be published before I'm 40. That was like my dream. And so it happened. And then what was really cool is they offered me a contract for 3 books. They said, hey, do you have more stories in this universe? And I thought, yeah, I do actually. So I signed a contract for the whole trilogy, and it's just been kind of a whirlwind ever since. And I've learned so much. And then the second series, Beautiful Dark Beast, is actually a spinoff of that one. So it's like set in the same world.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is through your what did you say it was through?
The published
Owl? Yeah.
City Owl Press.
City Owl Press. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and I noticed too is like, your first series that you had on there that follows the character Gray, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the second series follows a character named Ara Frost.
Aria Frost. Yeah.
Aria Frost. Okay.
Yeah.
And so where's the link in that sense? Where is Blood and Darkness and the Beautiful Dark Beast series? Is Beautiful Dark Beast in a way a sequel to Blood and Darkness, or is it like a kind of like a parallel story in a way, but it takes place in a different part of it?
Yeah, it's just set in the same world. So
Okay.
The last book in Blood and Darkness is called Gods and Demons. And there's a pretty big war that happens between Gray and Cerberus, who is, the demon from the underworld, essentially like the devil. And the results of what happened in Gods and Demons set up the spinoff. So it takes place 10 years later. And I do have cameos from some of the characters from the first book, like some of the favorites that people told me they really liked. So that's been really fun to do as well. But yeah, so there's some returning favorites, but the heroine is a new, character, and she wasn't in the previous series at all. But so it's the same world, and the same rules apply, and the same magic, and there's references made to both, but completely separate story. You could read them interchangeably. Yeah.
So how did you create? So when you were thinking about it, as you said, you're in a job you didn't like, and did you start off with having a world in mind, and then you kind of made characters to fit in that world, or did you have a character in mind, and you wanted to tell a story about that character?
Yeah, for me, it was the character. I came up with Gray, and she just came to me out of nowhere, and I just started exploring and researching. And then the plot is actually very loosely based on the historical event of the Pendle witch trials in Lancashire, England. And when I was reading this story about these witches, they were all tried except for 2 were let go. And I like spinning things on their head. So I thought, what if these 2 were let go because they weren't witches, but they were something even darker, and they were afraid of them or something. So that's kind of how the basis of Blood and Magic started, and then it kind of spiraled from there.
So once you kind of had that set up, it sounds you had either the luxury or the challenge of creating the world itself, almost like that parallel world. But unlike a high fantasy world where you had to invent geography, you did have to invent magic, which is hard. So did you kind of go with like a soft magic where things are more fluid, or was it hard magic where there's very specific rules that were strict that had to be followed?
That's a really good question. I think it's kind of a combination of both. I really, really obsessed with Greek mythology. So I took a lot of ideas from the mythology of things, like I have this narcissist magic where she has to go to the underworld to get, a pomegranate to, access it. And that was, part of a mythological story. And, like the wolves, the werewolves are based on a Greek goddess named Leto. And just, I wanted to that was where I was getting a lot of my ideas from. And when you get into gods and demons, I have the Furies and the Fates and, just kind of putting my own take on it. And essentially, like, vampires have been done so many times, right? Like we have so many different comparisons. You have like the really dark horror gothic of like, Nosferatu and Anne Rice, and then you've got like Twilight. And, people were kind of sick of the same tropes. So I wanted to create something totally different. And in my books, they don't come from bats or they're not afraid of the sun, that none of that can hurt them, silver crosses. They literally come from Diana and Apollo, who were, kind of, well, depending on which story you read, some say they were lovers, some say they were twins. But that's sort of like where I based it on. Yeah.
So, but yeah, with it as you kind of had to and that's the one fun thing about when you're reading a vampire novel or a werewolf novel or something like that. You look at the reinvention of some of those tropes. So what were some of the things that you wanted to kind of still keep sacred to say, well, it is a vampire because of this, or well, it is a werewolf because of this?
Well, I want, obviously they have to drink blood to be a vampire. However, I created this thing called blood magic, where if they linked with a vampire, linked with a witch, with this blood magic spell, then they not only would they become more powerful and adapt each other's or acquire each other's powers, they would also no longer need to feed. The feeding would go away. So yeah, the blood sucking was a big deal. Immortality, obviously, like having them live forever was one thing I wanted to keep. But that's kind of about it, to be honest. I really did my own thing. They're not like pale or sparkly or you can't stab them in the heart with a stake. I did actually, I will say I was influenced a little bit by the Vampire Diaries. It's one of my favorite shows. And so I did use the aspect of you had to like pull the heart out of their chest in order to kill one. So yeah.
Okay. And what about the werewolves? Are they like half wolf, half man? Are they and what's you said the mythology, the origins of them are also connected to as you said, to the Greeks as well?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the werewolves, similar to a lot of the tropes as far as like how they can transform, they don't need the full moon to do it. They can transform at will. But I did want to set up I created something called a witch charmer or wolf charmer, which is a witch that can put a wolf under her control, and then she can control their whole pack. And so I explore this a lot in Blood and Magic and in that trilogy. And so Lycos, who is the main alpha in the Lupi, basically meets Valentina, who's Gray's best friend. And for some reason, which you'll find out, there's this whole like prophecy where she is like the only one that can free him from this, wolf spell that he's been under by a character named Arcadia. So I do explore a lot of that mythology too. And I use a lot of Latin symbology and Latin words to describe my spells. And yeah, I just had a lot of influences from the past, I guess, to kind of set it all up.
As you kind of create the rules of your urban fantasy in your the paranormal universe here, what aspects that you felt like as you said, as a writer, with maybe some of the tropes, like you said, like that, I'm not going to do that, like not with the stakes and all that. Is there any specifics, like supernatural aspects that you're like, I'm not bringing that in, it just doesn't fit?
Yeah, I mean, like the thing where they like can't go out in daylight, I've never really understood that. I don't feel like even though it's such a classic trope that we all know, I don't feel like anyone's ever really explained that. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I've just never, even in my self-published Immortal Billionaire series, I have a vampire or two, and they go out in the daylight just fine. And I've seen other shows where they have like a daylight ring, or a witch gives them some sort of spell, and I'm just like, well, why wouldn't they be able to go out in the daylight? It doesn't, like, I don't know. It's kind of outdated and old fashioned, the whole creatures of the night thing, which is cool. But I just didn't want to do that. And so that's why I had the vampires stem from Apollo, who is the sun god. So I explained it that way in the book. I said they can't, the sun doesn't hurt them because they were created by a sun god. So.
And do you see, and is there like other supernatural creatures exist? I mean, we did talk about there's, the incubus, and you have demons and stuff in there. What about like any of the other classic monster things, like, you said you mentioned witches. Mm-hmm. Witches are in there, like mummies, and
yeah, no, those are all. I wanted to stay away from mummies and like zombies, right, because I feel like that is a totally different like genre in itself, like the classic. I'm a huge zombie nerd. George Romero is like my favorite person on the planet. But I wanted to keep it more, witches, vampires. I do go into harpies. I love the concept of harpies. So they feature prominently in books 2 and 3. And then in my Beautiful Dark Beast series, I created my own supernatural character called a gravedigger. And it's essentially a soulless, kind of like a zombie in a sense, with 2 black holes for eyes. And whoever the witch is that controls it, he or she has to obey. And basically it's like a soldier for a witch, to like torture and, terrify people.
That's awesome. So kind of like a flesh golem or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, definitely.
What about fairies? Do you have fairies in your world?
Not outright. God, I love the fae and I love fairies, and I actually really want to do a fairy series at some point. But I felt like it was too much. I will say that in Smoke and Ritual, I base a lot of the witch covens on fairy lore. Like I have a group of witches called, the Nixies. So I definitely took inspiration from fairies to create like my witch covens.
That's awesome. So as you said, so your Blood and Darkness and your Beautiful Dark Beast series are connected. They're in the same universe.
Yeah.
Your Immortal Billionaires, is that the same universe?
It is not, no.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, completely different. It reads more, well, basically the difference is it's paranormal romance where the plot focuses on the romance itself, and the magic and the supernatural aspects are the subplots. Whereas in my other 2 books, the plots, the main focus is the quest, the magic, and the romance kind of is the subplot. So if you can take the romance out and not have the story altered, then it's technically urban fantasy. So yeah, with Immortal Billionaires, it kind of reads more contemporary. I mean, technically, I could make them regular people and not even supernatural creatures, and it would still be, like a complete story in a sense, with just altering a few things. But I really wanted to explore the supernatural stuff in a modern setting without any fictitious worlds or any like obvious magic. Just like, hey, I got this job at a restaurant, and the owner of the restaurant is a vampire, and he is obsessed with me. Like that kind of a storyline.
Did you ever but does it also follow though kind of like your same world building rules when it comes to magic and stuff? It's the same mythos, or did you create like the vampire in Immortal Billionaires book 1? Is it the same rules as the vampires in your other series?
Yes, it is. He can walk in the daylight without any, assistance from, anything. And you have to pull out their heart, to kill them. The only difference with this series is for some reason, which I haven't explained yet. So that's what I'm saying. For some reason, I don't want to give too much away. Vampires are actually sensitive to silver instead of werewolves being, that's the trope that we hear a lot, the silver with the werewolves, but I decided to spin it on his head and do it for the vampires.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
And so yeah, with that in there, is there any like like some of your avid readers, did you put in any little Easter eggs or something like that that people might read in your Immortal Billionaire series that will make reference to your other series?
A part of me wanted to, but contractually I can't.
Oh, okay.
So that's the only, like, the main reason. I don't want to
Okay.
like have any sort of ties to it, because it's not that world that I've created with Blood and Darkness is, tied with City Owl Press, and then this series
Right.
is my own thing. So, but you will get plenty of Easter eggs between the two series of Blood and Darkness and Beautiful Dark
Okay.
Beast. There's a lot of really cool stuff that I added. That if you read the first series, which I'll get emails from people that are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you brought him back," or, "Oh, I remember this," and so. That's been really fun. But yeah, Immortal Billionaires is its own complete, like, standalone series away from all that.
So for contractually speaking, you can't do it. Can you do it the other way around? Could you add some little Easter eggs about Immortal Billionaires in, like, issue with the, maybe like in your Beautiful Dark Beast books?
Not really. No, it just doesn't really work. I mean, they're very, very different. The writing style is different, the mood, the tone. Yeah, they're just, I mean, basically, it's a book that I wrote because I have a very distinct style, the way that I write. But it's so very set apart that it would just be kind of weird, I think, for me to like try to merge them in some way.
So we have like other authors that will listen to this podcast and listen.
Yeah.
And so some of them are, new and wanting to know, hey, how do I, how do you get into doing this? And you kind of mentioned it earlier of, finding one of those small press publishers. But
Yeah.
I guess that the question that would be one question to ask is, you were very successful in creating these urban fantasy books. Were you, when you decided to write Immortal Billionaires, book 1 last year, when you published that last year, self-published that, was that a decision based off of, I don't want to be known as the urban fantasy person, or did you just have a good story and you're like, I want to just write this story, this is going to be a fun genre, I just want to write? So was it based off of an idea of you as a writer, you wanted to tell that story, or was this based off of a career decision to not be specified into a certain genre author?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it was more, I have a million plot ideas that go through my head, like too much. Like, I have lists and lists and lists. And, I was waiting on edits for one of my books with City Owl, and I had this downtime, and I started reading a lot of romance, specifically paranormal and billionaire romance, during the pandemic, as we all had a ton of time on our hands. And I started reading it and really, really getting into it. And then, of course, the plot bunnies come running into my head, and I started to get this idea for After I Fall. And the other thing I really wanted to do with the book, I've been in the hospitality industry for 20 plus years, and I really wanted to do a book that kind of centered around the restaurant industry in a sense, and include like my knowledge of like wine and food into a character story. And then I also started watching a ton of stuff on Netflix. Again, so much time on our hands. And I would say, and it sounds like a really weird comparison, but there was a show on Stars called Sweet Bitter. It was based on a book, and it's about like kind of the grittier, more authentic side of the hospitality industry. And so I took that, and then I watched a movie called 365 Days with Michele Morone, which was a very dark, graphic, very sexual, film that a lot of women watched, and it rose to like #1 in Netflix. And those two concepts were like so cool to me, and I thought, well, how can I merge them? And everyone needs to be a vampire. Like, that's my thing. I watch a show and I'm like, well, this is a great show, but it'd be better if they were all vampires.
And so, and I got to ask you too, just from the advice perspective, just, doing the page count on these things. None of these are under 150 pages. You got, the first one was 184, the second one was 168. Around the same time, you also were producing 200 plus page books for your urban fantasy series.
Yeah.
Now, so when somebody says, "Listen, you know what, Melissa, this is great. I got a job. Like, I got a job to do. What would be your advice for someone to say, if you're serious about this, what would be your advice to say, if you want to write, what would you suggest for that?"
Yeah, well, it's definitely it's hard, when you
Right.
work full time to write, and to especially if you have a family, if you have kids. I don't have any kids, but I know a lot of my friends do, and they struggle, with finding that time to write. And I will say, the pandemic, being at home, definitely gave me a lot more space, and freedom to write faster, to write more quality books. But before that, I just had to use every ounce of time I had, instead of watching television or playing on social media for hours at a time. I would just write. I would write till 4 o'clock in the morning and get
Wow.
like 5 hours of sleep. And, you know, um, you just have to. On my days, I'd work, full time, 5 days a week, and I'd get home at 10 o'clock. I was a night shift person. So I would get home at 10 o'clock and, pour a glass of wine and sit down at my computer and start writing. And then on my days off, that's all I did was I'd write for 8 hours a day on both days off. And, I didn't have much of a life. So it is a sacrifice.
Right.
If you want to write just because you love writing, then do it whenever you feel like it. But if you're doing it because you want to be published and you want a career, you have to treat it like a business.
Right.
And you have to set your own deadlines and your own goals. And it can be challenging, but if you really want it, if you really want to do it, then, you'll have to make it work. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing and finishing a novel. Like, don't start something and then pick up something else and start that. And then you have like 10 unfinished novels in your drawer. You have to just commit to like the project you're working on. And even if it doesn't come out great, at least you were like, I finished it and it's a book that I wrote. So, I mean, that's my biggest thing. It's really hard to juggle. And
Right.
there are weeks that are harder than others where I'm like pulling out my hair and I'm like, I just need, an hour of where I don't have to do marketing or branding or anything like that. So, but I really believe that if you really want it, and I speak from, someone who started this career at 35, like you don't have to be, young or old. You can be any age, to start it. You just have to do it.
And I think one of your friends, Kendrick, also mentioned, and she co-hosts a podcast. So you do wear
Yeah.
many hats.
Yes, I threw that into the mix as well this year, last year. Yeah. And that's been really, really fun because I'm learning so much about like how comic book creators create. It's a completely different process, so it's been fun to like pick their brains about world building and character development. And I've, learned a couple things from them, and it's just fun. It's great to like talk to people, especially when we were also closed off, from the world for so long. So the podcast became like my outlet of just like social hour. I get to chat with cool people, and occasionally I get to interview someone who I really admire and have been fangirling over forever, and that's always exciting too.
And so what also advice would you say for like that you learned from when you came out with, your first book in Blood and Darkness series back in 2018 to now publishing, as we say, but in this October, you're coming out with, Immortal Billionaires book 4.
Yeah.
What are the things are you doing differently now 3 years later than you did that you wished you knew back in 2018?
Wow. Yeah, it's always changing, the process. I guess I probably have learned to not stress out so much about the first draft. It would take me forever to write a first draft because I would just sit there and try to like edit myself as I was going, which doesn't work because you'll just never finish. So that's the biggest thing is like, just write it. It doesn't matter. No one's going to see it. You're the only one that's going to see it. And I've heard a lot of people say it, but until you're actually like in the middle of it is when you believe it, because when you're like, wow, it took me a year to write an 80,000 word novel. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's your pace, but I wanted to be quicker. I wanted to be faster at it. And the reason what was slowing me down was my own hangups and my own like fears and insecurities about writing. And so I just said, you know what, I just need to write the first draft and get it over with. And then I can go back and edit. And I'm one of those weirdos that likes editing. I like actually picking the book apart and like expanding on scenes and stuff like that. It's like fun for me. So, so I'm like, now I just write the first draft. And then, you know, really, really studying your craft is so important. I still like, I take so many courses and workshops and craft books, and it's fun. I'm like addicted to them. I think they're awesome. And there's so many good ones out there. And it's just important to, you know, and to write. I will say this though, depending on like how your schedule is, it doesn't mean you don't have to write every day. You just have to make the most of the days that you do write.
Well, that's a good piece of advice too. And what's one of the works? Give us an example of one of the workshops that you attended, like a writing workshop or something, where you heard something and you said, "Whoa, that is great advice! I'm putting it on a Post-it note and I'm sticking it on my screen." Do you have any of those that you wanted? Any of those snippets of wisdom you wanted to give as well?
Yeah, I just took one a couple days ago by Alessandra Torre, and she runs Inkers Con, and it was just like a little short 1 hour, and it's more about publishing rather than the craft. But she just talked about like finding your niche and sticking to it, and gave some great tips on how to like sustain your career as an indie author. So that was really great. And then one of my favorite craft books is Story Genius by Lisa Krohn, and it just delves into like the psychology of characters. And you know, a lot of times when you look, you know, up character development, you get these really kind of cheesy, generic character sheets. It's like favorite color and favorite food, and it's like that's not really what we're going for. You know, you want to delve into like their traumas and their history and what motivates them. So this book I highly, highly recommend. I read it in like 2 days, and I reread it every time I start a new book because she has some amazing, amazing advice and techniques to really developing your characters.
Wow. Okay, great. And when you're talking, I guess one of your fans, Jay Horse's editing is always fun. So,
yeah. Oh, he loves editing, right, John? His favorite thing. He's talking about editing podcast episodes, by the way, not stories. I'm sure he edits his comics too, but that's what he's referring to. I'm pretty sure.
So chat with us then, Melissa, about your. So you have After I Run is coming out in a 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Yeah, July 27th.
You have it listed on July 27th.
Yeah.
Do you want to chat with us a bit about what people can expect from that? I think you have it on here someplace, right? I think.
Yeah, it's under, you know what? I don't know if I've added it on my website yet.
Okay.
Oh, it might be. It might be on there, actually.
Yeah, I think
the fourth one is on there. So the third one should be on there too.
It's going to be on here. Yeah,
this is my life where I have so many links that I can't remember. Oh, there it is. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, After I Run right here. This is the one with the werewolf.
Yes, Cassius. And so essentially, without giving too much away, in the beginning of After I Fall, the first book, Cassius makes an appearance. He's Ozzy's good friend. They're part of this group of guys that are immortals. They're called the Sons of the Fallen. So it's Ozzy, Cassius, and Lux. Lux is from book 2. He's an incubus, and Ozzy's a vampire. So essentially in book 1, they're all of a sudden they start seeing that someone is trying to hack into their accounts, and they make their money on the black market, basically hunting and trading magical artifacts. So Cassius makes an appearance in book 1, and then book 2, he's sort of like their go-to tech guy. So he does feature in book 2 a little bit. And then book 3, After I Run, is his story, and he finally catches the hacker, and it's not who he thought. He was expecting some dude that he could like tie to a chair in a room and, you know, beat the info out of, and he realizes it's a very attractive woman named Harley, and Cassius is not in the business of holding women hostage, so they have an interesting first introduction, and the story kind of goes from there, and he just wants to know who she's working for, and you know what information of theirs that she's stolen and how she's compromised them, and then over the process of this, they start to fall for each other. So it's a really fun story about wolves, and he's got two hilarious pack members slash security guards who are twins, Lars and Marek, and they're very snappy and campy and form a little bit of a relationship with Harley in like a friendship way. So it was really fun writing them. I love snappy dialogue and campiness. So yeah, it's a fun book. And then of course Cade's the villain in all the books, and he features in book 4. So we find a lot more about Cade in book 3.
Wow. And do you have, so also do you, does the do you have it, maybe not, not in the books, but do you have it kind of written out as well of just the origins of the supernatural creatures, on their origins, or is it similar to your other urban fantasy, or is this completely different? Like, is
Right.
you
Yeah, it's different. So the demons and supernaturals of this world come from Lilith in
Oh,
in
okay.
literal hell. Yeah, and
Okay.
I've explored it quite a bit, and with every book you learn like a little bit more about kind of
Right.
like what she did to them, and how she set them loose onto our world and our planet. So yeah, there's no Greek mythology
In this one,
in
okay.
this one. Yeah.
All right. I was curious about that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, and then as you said earlier, then there's going to be a fifth one called, After I Obey. And is that
Mhm.
it for the series, or you're going to have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10?
I think it's gonna be ongoing.
Really?
As
Okay.
much as I have, um, if I get ideas, then I'll keep it going, and I get new ideas like every day. So it's um, it's a blessing and a curse. Um, but yeah, so after I obey, so basically in book 4, I'm actually going to tie up that one underlying arc.
Story arc.
Yeah,
Okay.
it'll come to a head, and then book 5 is going to be a new story, still set in the same world, and the characters will still be connected, but I'll be introducing like a ton new people. So yeah.
So, as an author, I'm just kind of curious about this. So, who's in charge as you're writing? Is it the characters, or are you in charge? Are you is it kind of a sandbox, or is it an amusement park, meaning you have to follow a certain path, or is it like a sandbox where you sit down and you're like, let's see what's going to happen today, and you just start typing? How does that work?
Well, I'm a control freak, so I'm
Okay.
in charge. I know a lot of people say, like, I mean, you have those moments where you're like, oh, the character just spoke out of turn, and it's like it's not really true. I mean, it's just your own brain like doing stuff. But yeah, I like outlining a lot. I did try to do what they call pantsing on one book, and it just ended up being a disaster.
Okay.
It was like, no, this isn't going to work. So I'm very meticulous. I have 100 notebooks all the time, and I'll just sit down and write. I like to do it by hand
Right.
when I'm plotting, and I'll just write it down and scene by scene, extended, and that can change when I'm writing. It's not like set in stone, but it provides a blueprint. So if I don't ever get writer's block because I
Okay.
have this outline to essentially, like, not to say that I don't ever, because I have gotten it before, but it's normally because I just can't figure out how I want the scene to go essentially. But as far as the plot goes, I do it all extensively outlined ahead of time, and it just makes it easier, and it helps me write faster and not get lost in like a bunch of different plot threads that are going to go nowhere, and then you have to like rewrite 30 pages, and yeah, it's just easier.
So I guess my question too is there been a point where, like, when you have your content editor, you're like, here, can you check this out? And they would read it. I'm like, I don't think either, like, Harley or Gray or they wouldn't have done this, Melissa. Why did you write? And you're like, well, I kind of, has there been any points where you kind of had a fight with your editor to say, well, I needed this to happen, or like, did any of that happen at all for you?
No, actually, I've never had that happen to me, and I know it does
Okay.
happen, a lot. But I think I have such a good grasp on like who my characters are
Right.
and what they would do. I have had, of course, I mean, when you have editors, they like, hey, this isn't working, or this plot doesn't feel right, or this scene doesn't work. And I'm always very open-minded. Like I want the book to be the best that it can be. And I really, really take value in other people's opinions, especially like editors who know what they're doing, and that's their job. So I love when people point things out and like, hey, this isn't working, or you could make this stronger. And I almost always take the advice and shift the story and make the change. I mean, there's been a couple things where I'm like, mostly in naming. There was a name, the way that I worded the name that I wanted to keep. And I had a copy editor say, oh, I don't think this is grammatically correct, but I said, well, it's a name of something, so I want it to be this way, but other than that, I'm really open to, accepting all the advice.
So, what would be your advice for writers and authors to, like, if they're looking at independent publishing, and then you make some, get some points of like, this is the benefits of independent publishing, this is the benefits of having a publisher. And one of the benefits of having a publisher, and you said in a previous interview, is like, if you're working with a publisher who says you have to pay up front, you shouldn't need to. You should be able to say they get a cut of your book, right?
Yeah, that's there's a lot of predatory vanity presses out there, and for some, they prey on new writers because it's exciting to get that email that says, oh, we're so interested in your book. But when they're asking you for money up front, that is not legit. And you can research that online. And there's a Writers Beware website. I believe if you just type in Writers Beware, there's a site that exposes a lot of these companies. No, the way that you make money is through royalties. So when you do a small press or a big traditional publisher like Simon & Schuster, they will they'll take a cut of your book sales, and you sign a contract and agree to it all beforehand, what the percentage is going to be, but you never pay someone to publish your book. The only time you're paying up front is when you're actually self-publishing, because that's different. That's on you. You're hiring people to publish your book. But even Amazon doesn't charge anything to upload your book to. They just take a cut when you sell. So that's really, really important that people should really know. Like, don't get too excited, because what they'll do is they'll take $2,000-$3,000 of your money, and then you'll never hear from them again. So it's not the way to go. Right. But I think that small press and indie are both beneficial. It just depends on what you're willing to do. I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, I'm so grateful that I did small press first, because I don't think I would have been able to self-publish if I hadn't had this experience first, because I knew nothing about the industry. And being with City Owl Press has taught me so much about genre and word count, and how books are marketed and how they're written and how editors work. And having those experiences, I was able to go, okay, 3 years later, I feel confident enough to do this on my own. I wouldn't have been able to do that without that experience. So, but other people are different. I know some people that have just been strictly indie from the get-go, and they're making, 5-6 figures a month. It's, everyone's journey is different, but my advice, if anyone cares, would be to try to do a small press first and get established, build your platform, build your reader base, learn about the industry. And then when you have those tools, then take them and do your indie career as well.
So what would you say then so two questions for you. So, and they're kind of interlinked in a way. So what would be your advice for somebody who, says that, say, go to an indie press first or small press? Mm-hmm. Where would you recommend them to look to find a list of those?
Well, I think Publishers Marketplace has a listing of reputable small presses. You can go to, what is it? There's a hashtag. Oh, manuscript wish list and I think it's abbreviated on Twitter. And if you just go to their website, and that is like a list of agents and small press publishers who are listing like what they're looking for, so that, people will query them. And that's a really good way to do it. But also just, really research. Even before I signed with City Owl Press, I contacted a couple of their authors and just emailed them and said, hey, like, I received this offer. I just wanted to see like what your experience has been like with them.
Oh, yeah.
Just to get kind of like a different perspective and an authentic perspective. So definitely do your research. Check out those like buyer beware types, what writers beware websites, and put in the name of the place you're looking at and see if it comes up with any complaints. And a lot of agents and publishers are also registered with RWA, which is the Romance Writers Association. And there's different, like, I think there's a fantasy one as well. So yeah, just checking out their affiliates and, even looking at their Twitter pages and look at their website. I mean, you can see if someone's website looks like it was just like thrown together, and held together with duct tape. Like you definitely can tell. So I would say, yeah, definitely do your research before you sign your rights away to your books, because yeah.
Yeah, because in your way you're sharing an IP with them, so it's like you want to make sure it's And how long do those contracts usually last? At what point does that lapse back to the author? Is that dependent on?
I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but most of the contracts I've seen and heard of are usually like 4 to 5 years. I think it depends on if they're small press or big traditional press. I'm not sure about that, but yeah, you just have to be careful about what you sign and read the fine print, and even have a lawyer look at it. If you're not 100% sure, definitely have a lawyer check it out and make sure that it is in your best interest, because essentially it's your creation, so you don't want anyone taking advantage of you.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, and you said in a previous interview that one of the benefits of going to a publishing house as well is that you don't have to find an editor. You don't have to worry about that stuff. So, what would be your advice now that you've swam in both ponds there? I guess I'm bad at analogies. But what would you say is so if advice to give a self-publisher to, where would you find a good editor? Where do you know where they could find a good copy editor or a content editor?
Yeah, there's a website that I use, which a lot of writers are familiar with, called Reedsy, Reedsy. And Reedsy really has a marketplace. So you can find an editor, a copyright editor, you can find book cover artists on there. I've found a few of my people organically, just from like being in the industry and getting to know people. My editor for the first 2 books of Immortal Billionaires was someone who, I became friends with on Twitter. She's an author herself, and she actually went to school, for English. She's an English major, and she actually, funny enough, she helped me write the first chapter. Well, she edited the first chapter of Blood and Magic way back, way back in the day. No, not that far back, but I met her, on Twitter, and I said, I really need help. I'm getting all these rejections and I really want to get this book published. Would you look at my first chapter? At the time I couldn't really afford to get the whole book edited. So she said, yeah, of course. And she helped me with the first chapter. And literally after that, I got the deal with City Owl Press.
Wow.
So yeah, having a good editor is really important. So after that, we just, stayed in contact and we became really good friends. So I had her edit the first 2 books of this series. And then due to her own books, she had a timing conflict for book 3. So I went on to Reedsy and found a great editor on there, and have another great editor for book 4. So that's really the best place, I think. And then just asking other authors, joining groups on Facebook and Twitter, where you can talk to other writers, other authors. 20 books to 50K on Facebook is a fantastic indie group. It's one of the largest indie groups in the world. I think they have over, 80,000 members, and that's run by Craig Martell. And it's invaluable, the information I've learned from that. Essentially, when I decided to go indie self-publishing, I went onto that group and was like,
oh yeah,
I need to search this group and find out, everything that I can. So that's my advice for anyone who's thinking of going indie. Definitely check out that group.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's so I just wanted to get back just to let people know if they're interested in learning more about your books or reading your books, they should be able to go to melissasercia.com
Mm-hmm.
and be able to, and you have links to all your books on here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's
Okay.
like a books tab that you can click on and it'll bring up every single title.
And they're
Yeah.
able to, for those that want to just, PDFs versions of it
Mhm.
or physical copies and things like that.
Yeah, it's available. So my Immortal Billionaire series is available on Kindle Unlimited. So if you subscribe to that, you can, read it for free. And then I have paperbacks for everything. And then my Blood and Darkness series is not on Kindle Unlimited, but you can get the ebook on, pretty much everywhere on Kobo, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and I think Smoke and Ritual and Spark and Ember are still in Kindle Unlimited for now. So I will say, if you're going to read them, if you have Kindle Unlimited, read them now, because there's something that's happening that I can't announce yet, but I don't think they're going to be on Kindle Unlimited for very long.
Well, this has been great, Melissa. I had a great time chatting with you, and I'm really excited to just see all more of these books just seems to be coming out almost every other month or so. So
I know. I have no life now.
You're creating life. I mean,
That's
look
right.
at all these worlds.
That's
You're
right.
creating worlds upon worlds.
That's right.
So yeah, come back anytime, because I'm sure you'll have something new coming out. So I had a great time chatting with you, Melissa. This has been fantastic.
Oh yeah, no, this has been so much fun. You're awesome, and I would love to come back.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And you're right. I heard you in a previous interview. You said you kind of like take one day a week, and that's like your solid writing day. Is that what I said, or did I hear correctly? It was like a Thursday.
Yeah, no, it's the opposite. I take like one day a week to actually have a life.
Oh, so I got
Yeah, I write. Well, when I'm in the throes of literally, trying to finish a book, I don't take a day off. So I've worked, 25, 26 days in a row without stopping. Yeah. And then when I finish a book, it's like I go into a coma for 4 days.
What does your pets think? They're like, hey, come on, didn't you say you have like a cat or two, don't you?
I do. Yeah. She might walk by at some point. Yeah. I noticed in the last video I did, she was just like creeping behind me. So. Yeah. Everyone loves me in this house, right?